We are back on the floor of ITS America 2026 here in Detroit, and I have to tell you, this conference just keeps delivering. I'm Salika Talbot with the Transportation Channel, and I'm sitting down right now with Karthik Thumula, Director of Device Security at Palo Alto Networks. Karthik, your session earlier this week was so interesting, and I have been looking forward to having this conversation with you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I want to jump right in, because I think cybersecurity and transportation is just one of those topics that most people in the general public generally do not think about until something goes wrong. And by the time something goes wrong, it's really, really bad for a lot of people. So let's start making this real for people who aren't in the building. You work specifically on device security and transportation networks. But before we get to the technical side, help our listeners understand what are we actually talking about. When someone drives through an intersection or past a highway camera, what's happening behind the scenes on the network that they never see?
That's a great question. So think of it like you asking an AI assistant. Like when you're driving through the intersection, you're like asking an AI assistant like a Gemini or ChatGPT a question, right? So you get a quick response, but underneath the hood, there is a complex set of network systems processing that information, providing that response real time. And same thing applies with this intelligent transportation systems, right? Like when you drive through the intersection, right? Like we are basically dealing with traffic signal controllers, pedestrian detection systems, LiDAR sensors. They produce tons of data, right? So that information gets sent over through a regional hub, right? So that is within the traffic cabinet. So you have like a metal traffic cabinet which is connected through like a firewall or a switch through which the data gets transferred to a regional hub through which it gets sent over to the traffic management control. So this is tons of data which we are dealing with. And historically, when you look at this transportation systems, these are closed loop devices, right? Like these are isolated. But when you look at it from the modern intersection standpoint, they are completely connected because the more intelligent transportation system becomes, the more connected these are.
Wow. So every intersection, every camera, virtually every sensor is essentially a node on a network that most people have never thought about. Agencies are managing, and they have far fewer resources today than they used to.
Yeah.
It kind of creates a picture of what matters.
Right.
So what I'm going to ask you next is going to help us, I think, understand actually what is and isn't happening. In the presentation that you gave earlier this week, the title said, "Threats don't stop at red lights."
Yeah.
A little scary. Walk us through a realistic scenario where a bad actor gets into a traffic cabinet on the side of the road. What happens from there? How far can they actually go?
So if you look at like current traffic cabinets, which are sitting at the intersection or at the roadway, these can be opened through a Type 2 universal key, right? Like you, me, anyone can access it. Go into the intersection, we can open it, right? Which is bad. But on the other side, like when you open the cabinet, you are seeing a closet of network which contains the signal controllers, the sensors, and along with that you have like an unmanaged switch, which is basically providing the connectivity for these systems, right? Like if I am a bad actor, I can just go plug my computer or a Raspberry Pi device and I can sniff the network, identify and laterally move from one device to another device, because the more intelligent, like I mentioned, transportation become, like we have pretty much connected these devices across other transportation hubs, to the municipalities, to the traffic management control centers. So like everything is interconnected right now in this modern ITS world. So that means like if one of these gets compromised, you're pretty much breaching that entire network and someone can go and deploy ransomware within the network. So that's how bad it could go.
I really want the audience to kind of sit with that for a second. We're not talking about someone stealing data from a corporate server. We're talking about physical infrastructure that controls the movement of people throughout an entire city. So traffic signals, cameras, public safety system, and the door to open it is right there at the side of the road.
Right.
It's a little frightening, I have to tell you. And this explains why we have problems still in 2026. You're showing that ITS networks are flat, meaning once someone is in, they can move laterally across the whole system. And that's not how we build a network today. So why does it still exist this way in transportation of all places?
I mean, if we go way back to history, like the transportation systems are primarily designed for availability and safety, right? So security was never in mind when these guys have deployed these transportation systems, right? So the idea was you have a point A, you have a point B, you need to provide connectivity securely from point A to point B, right? Not securely, but like providing connectivity from point A to point B. But now, if you look at these devices, right, like you have expanded the horizon for these devices. So now the challenge is every time when the camera changes, right, like the angle changes, or every time when a pedestrian system, like a device plugs in or processes the information, or traffic signal phase changes, right, there is tons of data which we are actually adding to the network. And on the other side, what we also observe is like most of these transportation systems, like they think that like when you secure the perimeter, which in their case is the roadway safety cabinet, that it dwells is that like they are providing physical security. But in reality, that is not the case, right? Like I mentioned earlier in the example, the bad actor can go laterally propagate from the traffic cabinet, go all the way to the traffic management control center. So just providing physical security is not just about providing network access. There's a lot more to that.
Right. Wow. That's a really honest answer about infrastructure.
Yeah.
And how actually it gets built versus what we may even perceive
Right.
has been built. Decisions that made sense 20 or 30 years ago
Right.
Are now highlighting the vulnerability, and I'm sure are keeping security directors up at night. The architecture has outlasted the threat environment
Right.
that it was initially designed for, and we have a term that gets thrown around a lot as the solution to all of this, and I want to get your real take on what it actually means out in the field. The term is zero trust. It's a phrase that we hear everywhere. What does it actually mean in the context of a signal cabinet, right? Sitting on the side of the road, in the rain maybe, with a universal key that half a dozen contractors have access to. What does that mean?
Yeah, we need to come to an assumption that like, providing physical segregation is not zero trust. Like, at some point, a key get copied, a contractor or a rogue person get access to that particular cabinet, he can snip the network, he can identify the devices within the network. So that will happen. So that is not physical segregation is not zero trust. Like what we need is more identity-based access control. So that's exactly where like you need to have like a platform or like a firewall which can provide that identification of the behavior identity of every device within the network. Like if I take like an example of this queue-free signal controller which we sit in the traffic cabinet, so that talks to V2X devices, that talks to like signal controllers, TMC devices. So it uses like industrial protocols like TCP. So that is the only protocol the device needs to communicate. Let's say if the device is using like an SSH connection to another cabinet which is across the street, that's a deviation from its normal baseline behavior. And that's exactly where when you are creating zero trust, you basically need to think about the behavior identity of the device, the machine identity of the device, and based on that you need to create this least privilege access policies, allowing what level of access this device needs to have and what kind of applications the device needs to communicate with, and based on that you need to create your zero trust.
So then that means zero trust isn't physical infrastructure as much as it's a philosophy. You have to build into how an agency thinks and about access and verification at every single point in the system,
Right.
Which is a cultural shift, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Before you can even get to zero trust, though, there's a really very basic problem that I think you've raised,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of stopped me cold when I think about it. One of the things that jumped out at me was that many agencies simply do not know what is on their own networks. So how do you even begin to solve for a problem like this when people don't even know what they need to protect?
Yeah. So to your point, right? Like you can't protect something which you can't see, right? So for that, like if you have like a traffic cabinet and if you want to go on inventory, there is no way like you can go and you can do the inventory of all these devices. Imagine you have like 14,000 intersections, right? You go and manually doing that, that's not going to possible, that's not going to scale. Like that's where like you need to have more dynamic way of like providing the visibility of all these connected intelligent transportation systems. So with Palo Alto, we have device security, which provides this granular visibility of every connected device which you are connecting into the traffic cabinet, be it a traffic signal controller, be it a flow sensor, be it a CCTV, be it like a LiDAR sensor, you name it, right? Like we could go and we can detect every connected device. So basically underneath the hood, we use machine learning, deep packet inspection to identify every device. So we surface what is a vendor, what is a model, what is the operating system, the firmware version, the serial number of the device, what kind of applications the device needs to communicate with. All the context from the device standpoint is something which we can provide. So once you have the context, now you can identify if the device has any vulnerabilities, risks associated with that. Like that will help us to identify, because most of the times we are talking about the devices which are pretty legacy, right? Like devices which are running like 20 years old. Like these devices has like unsupported OS. Like we can go and we can identify all that when you have full visibility. Then you can go and you can write this least privilege access policies or segmentation controls and identity-based policies.
So it's like visibility through security and security through visibility, the two
Yeah,
sides of the coin. You
yeah,
can't defend a perimeter you can't see.
yeah.
And then the honest reality is that a lot of agencies have devices on their networks that were installed by contractors years and years ago, and nobody has a complete accounting of them.
Mm-hmm.
We're not saying the agencies are negligent, but it's the reality of transportation infrastructure. It's how it got built and maintained over the long haul. So I want to talk about something that is being sold as the solution to all of this, but also frankly raises its own set of questions. The illustrious 5G, right? It's supposed to make transportation smarter and more connected, but the more connected we get, the bigger the risk gets. Um, is 5G making transportation more or less secure? And what should agencies be asking with respect to their connectivity providers that probably they're not asking right now?
No, that's a good question. So, in my opinion, 5G is a double-edged sword, right? Like it is actually providing connectivity, right? Like the latest analytics, interconnected systems, the smart cities, everything for the department. But on the flip side, like if you look at it, you are expanding the attack surface with this 5G. Because oftentimes there is a misconception within the agencies thinking that like, okay, I have this provider who is providing my 5G connectivity, so they will take care of my security. But in reality, that is not the case, right? Because what we need is like, every time when a 5G device connects, like this is not like a regular IP network. Like we are talking about like the IMEI, the IMSIs, the network slices, the mobile APN information. So with Palo Alto, we have the ability to detect these mobile identifiers, right, real time. So we can provide that native 5G security, which the providers can't provide. Like we can inspect the GTP and we can identify if there are any security threats within that. So using our native 5G security, we can provide the visibility of these mobile identifiers, and now we can take the same mobile identifiers and create segmentation policy saying that this particular IMEI device can only talk to this particular application. So that granular we could go from the policy standpoint.
That's great, and it drives home the point that 5G is not inherently more dangerous, but it does expand this sort of surface area that has to be secured.
Right.
And most agencies are probably not asking the right questions of the
Yeah.
people that are selling them this connectivity. And that gap can have real world implications. I want to spend a minute on what Palo Alto Networks actually brings to this problem, specifically because cybersecurity is a crowded space.
Mhm.
And I want our listeners to understand what makes this conversation different from other dozens of security vendors conversations that may be even happening in this building right now. What does Palo Alto Networks do differently? Lots of cybersecurity companies out there. What specifically are they bringing to ITS that's different from what a state DOT might already have or think that they have covered?
Right. That's a good question. I'm waiting for this since a long time. So if you look at the agencies currently, they are deploying this piecemeal solutions, right? Like some of them provide visibility, some provide a bit of security, some provide connectivity, but there is no one platform end-to-end which can provide the connectivity, the visibility and segmentation and threat prevention in one platform. Right? So that's exactly where Palo Alto can, using our platform approach, the part of platformization, we can use our 1NG firewall. You can deploy that in the TMC. You can deploy that in the cloud. You can deploy that at the ruggedized form factor within the traffic cabinet. And we can not only provide connectivity, we can provide the visibility of every connected device. We can create least privilege access policies and segmentation. We can identify the bad actors and threats real time, and we can do native threat prevention for this, right? So if I take a simple example, so let's take that metal traffic cabinet, right? So typically what you have is a router and like a device which is providing 5G security, and you have like a switch which is providing the connectivity, right? Now, with Palo Alto's NG firewall within the traffic cabinet, which is a ruggedized form factor NG firewall, we can provide connectivity which is backhaul back into the data center, or we can take the 5G capability and we can connect using 5G cellular back into the internet or to the cloud. And on top of it, we can provide visibility of all the devices within the traffic cabinet. And on top of it, we can secure these devices using segmentation policies. And let's say if one of the devices gets compromised, we can detect those polymorphic threats and we can block those exploits real time. So that's the beauty of this solution.
I think that last part is really important. Knowing what is covered.
Right.
One of the most dangerous places a transportation agency can have is to be confident in a security posture that hasn't been tested against the actual threat landscape.
Right.
I've heard the story frankly too many times. So let's end where it matters most, with the person who's going to leave the conference, go back to their office, and has to figure out where to start. For the transportation official who's listening, who's sitting on a legacy network and knows it, what's the one thing that they should do first thing Monday morning?
So again, my take would be don't go and do the segmentation on day one. Like I mentioned earlier, you can't protect something which you can't. Like you go deploy our Palo Alto next generation firewall as a sensor in the intersection or in the regional hub or at the TMC. Understand how these devices are communicating with each other. Understand the nuances of it, like what is the vendor, the model, the operating system, the complete context of the device, right? Because first of all, without providing the full visibility, understanding the behavioral analytics of this device, you can't go and create segmentation. So that's the first thing what I do. And I would place our firewall passively, monitor the network traffic, identify the traffic pattern, and then I can go and I can create least privilege access policies.
Well, thank you. Karthik, Thumula, Director of Device Security at Palo Alto Networks. This is the kind of conversation that the audience here at Transportation Channel needs to hear. Not the polished version of cybersecurity, but the real one. The threats are real, the gaps are real, and the work to close them hopefully starts now. You can find Palo Alto Networks here on the floor at ITS America. I'm Salika Talbot from the Transportation Channel. Stay curious, stay moving, and stay protected out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.